There are days that change your life forever, not because a miracle happened, not because you suddenly became more talented than everyone else, but because it was the day you looked at yourself and stopped accepting the old version of who you were. Have you ever felt like you were living in a loop? Wake up. Do the same familiar things. Scroll your phone for a few more minutes. Tell yourself you'll start taking things seriously tomorrow. Then tomorrow ends up looking exactly like today. And the scariest part is that kind of life doesn't hurt immediately. It quietly drains your energy, quietly shrinks your ambition, quietly turns the dreams that once kept you awake at night into thoughts you barely even remember anymore. A lot of people think standing still is safe, but I want you to understand something. Life never stands still. Either you are growing or you are falling behind. The world is changing faster than ever. AI is replacing people who work superficially. Distraction is becoming the biggest industry on the planet. Every day, millions of people wake up with huge goals, only to lose the entire evening to things that lead nowhere. And the painful part is that most of them don't even realize it's happening. They think they still have time. They think one day they'll change. They think inspiration will show up and transform them into a new person. But growth doesn't begin with inspiration. It begins with a decision. A very quiet decision. A decision nobody applauds. A decision that happens in deeply private moments when you become tired of living beneath your true potential. Because the truth is this, your life doesn't change when you want to be better. It changes the day you decide that continuing to live the same way has become too expensive. And in today's video, I want to share the most important principles for breaking out of that stagnation. Not temporary motivational quotes, not promises that excite you for a few minutes and disappear tomorrow, but principles that can change the way you see yourself, the way you act, and the way you build your future one day at a time. And stay until the end of the video because principle number 9 might be the moment that makes you never return to your old self again. Principle 1, the cost of staying the same. There is a price for standing still. The problem is most people never stop long enough to realize they're paying that price every single day. A lot of people think that if their life hasn't collapsed, then everything must be fine. They still go to work, still make money, still fulfill their responsibilities, still get through each day without any major disaster happening. But listen to me carefully. Standing still does not mean you are safe. Sometimes it's just decline happening too slowly for you to notice. Stagnation does not show up like a major accident. It appears in very small ways. You wake up with less energy than before. You start losing interest in the things that once excited you. Your days begin to look exactly the same. You stay busy but no longer feel like you're moving forward. And then one day, you look back and realize years have passed while your life is almost still in the exact same place. That is not stability. That is drifting disguised as stability. I've met many people living that way. They were not lazy. They were not unintelligent. Many of them actually had a lot of potential. But they all had one dangerous habit. They always thought they still had time. They said, "I'll get serious later, when things settle down, when I have more energy, when the timing is right." But do you know what happens? Later slowly turns into years. A man once told me he didn't understand why he felt disappointed with his life even though everything looked fine on the outside. He had a stable job, enough income to survive, a life many people would call safe. But every morning when he woke up, he felt something heavy inside him. Not because life was too difficult, but because deep down, he knew he was capable of becoming far more than this. That is the most dangerous kind of exhaustion. Not exhaustion from working too hard, but exhaustion from living beneath your true potential for too long. You can be incredibly busy and still feel empty, because not all effort creates progress. Some people run all day long, yet their life never actually moves forward. And the gap between being busy and truly growing is where many people lose their lives. Today, this is even more dangerous. You can spend hours on social media and still feel like you are learning. You can watch hundreds of motivational videos and still change nothing in your real life. You can always stay busy while never truly building your future. That is the trap of this era. Modern distraction no longer looks the same as before. It is designed to make you feel comfortable while your life stands still. And the frightening part is stagnation rarely creates immediate pain. It quietly steals your confidence, quietly makes you doubt yourself, quietly trains you to procrastinate, quietly turns huge goals into thoughts of "I can deal with that later." It's like stagnant water. It doesn't smell on the first day, but without fresh movement, sooner or later it begins to rot in silence. Human beings are the same way. When you stop growing, something inside you slowly begins to die. Not your body, but your ambition, your belief, your sharpness, your desire to become a better version of yourself. And then something strange happens. You begin to envy people who are moving forward. You become irritated when others succeed. You start feeling like life is unfair. But sometimes the problem is not that life is against you. It's that you have stood still for too long. I want you to ask yourself one serious question today. If your life looks exactly the same 5 years from now, would you truly accept that? Because the future does not automatically become better just because time passes. Time does not mature people. Growth comes from the decisions you make during that time. And maybe the most important moment in someone's life is when they finally realize that the cost of continuing to live the same way has become too expensive. Because once you see that clearly, you can no longer keep sleeping inside your old comfort zone, and then something else starts to happen. You stop asking, "Why is my life like this?" and begin facing a much harder question. Am I the one keeping myself stuck? And that is where all real change begins. Principle 2, stop explaining your life. There comes a point in life when the explanations you once used to comfort yourself begin to lose their power. Not because they suddenly became false, but because you've repeated them too many times. I haven't found the right opportunity yet. The timing isn't right. I don't have enough support. The economy is difficult. I'm too busy. I'll start when things become more stable. Those words sound reasonable, and sometimes they are partly true. Life is not fair to everyone. Some people truly do start under much harder conditions. I understand that, but you need to be careful of one very dangerous trap when explanations become a long-term shelter for stagnation. Because the truth is this: results do not care how reasonable your excuses are. Life does not automatically change just because you have a good story about why you haven't started yet. And here is the painful thing many people eventually realize. You can be extremely intelligent and still remain trapped in an unchanging life simply because you spend too much energy explaining instead of adjusting. I have seen this in many people. One man constantly said he had greater potential than his current job. And I believed him. He read books, took courses, had great ideas. He even understood success very well. But every year, he repeated the exact same life. When work didn't improve, he blamed the company. When his finances didn't improve, he blamed the market. When he abandoned goals, he blamed lack of time. It all sounded reasonable until 10 years passed. That is what you need to understand. Explanations may comfort you in the short term, but they often steal change from you in the long term. Because when every problem is placed outside yourself, you unconsciously hand all control of your life over to circumstances. If everything is the market's fault, you are powerless. If everything is other people's fault, you are powerless. If everything is the timing's fault, all you can do is wait. And many people are living in that waiting state. Waiting for motivation, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone to recognize them, waiting for the day they finally feel ready. But life rarely changes while you are waiting. It changes when you start taking responsibility for the part that belongs to you. That does not mean blaming yourself for everything. Not at all. Some circumstances are genuinely difficult. Some injustices are very real. But even in the hardest situations, there is always one thing that still belongs to you: how you respond, how you think, the habits you repeat every day, the actions you choose to take or not take. That is where real power begins. I want you to notice something. People who consistently move forward in life are not always people with better circumstances. Many of them are tired too, pressured too, they fail too. The difference is that they do not spend too much time explaining why they haven't succeeded yet. They spend their time adjusting. That is the mindset of growth. When someone lives in explanation mode, the question they constantly ask is, why is this happening to me? But when someone truly begins to mature, the question changes into, what needs to change in the way I am living? That is a massive shift. The first question makes you look outward. The second forces you to look inward. And looking inward is always harder because you begin to see the things you once tried to avoid. You realize you procrastinate more than you thought. You realize you are more easily distracted than you imagined. You realize you talk about goals more than you act on them. You realize you have negotiated with yourself for too long. The truth is sometimes painful, but remember this: a painful truth is still more useful than a comforting explanation, because truth helps you change. Explanations usually only help you stay where you are. Today, society makes this even more dangerous. Social media makes everyone feel like they are trying. You watch podcasts about discipline. You save videos about success principles. You read quotes about self-growth. But consuming content is not the same as growing. You can know a lot while your life still stands still. That is why so many modern people are trapped in a dangerous illusion. They think because they understand something, they are making progress. No. Life only responds to what you repeatedly do, not what you know, not what you plan to do, not what you promise to do next week, but what you actually do every single day when nobody is watching. And the moment you stop explaining your life, something very strange begins to happen. You feel stronger, not because things suddenly become easier, but because you stop wasting energy defending your old self. You begin to see results as data. If something is not working, you change your approach. If a habit is destroying you, you confront it. If your life is moving in the wrong direction, you stop telling stories and start rebuilding it. That is when real growth begins. Not when you feel the most inspired, but when you become honest enough to stop hiding behind beautiful explanations. And then you realize something even deeper. Many people do not fail because they lack potential. They fail because they still treat change as a choice instead of a requirement. And that is what we are going to talk about next. Principle 3. Growth begins with honest self-reflection. Most people want to change their life, but very few people truly want to look at themselves long enough to understand why they still haven't changed. Because real self-reflection is not as comfortable as social media quotes make it seem. It is not sitting with soft music while writing inspirational goals into a new notebook. It is the moment you sit alone and can no longer continue lying to yourself. I think there is a reason so many people keep themselves constantly busy. Not because they love work that much, but because busyness helps them avoid the truth. As long as every day stays full of activity, you never have to ask yourself, am I actually moving forward? As long as there is always noise around you, you never have to hear the quiet voice inside saying, this life could have been so much more. Some people have spent years living on autopilot like this. They do everything out of habit. Wake up on time, go to work on time, pay bills on time, handle responsibilities. From the outside, everything looks fine. But deep down, they feel themselves slowly disappearing. Not because life is too difficult, but because they no longer feel like they are growing anymore. I once met a man in his 40s. One day, he reopened an old gold journal he had written almost 10 years earlier. And what left him speechless was not failure. It was the fact that nearly every goal inside it was still sitting there untouched. The same old dreams, the same old promises, the same old version of someday. Do you know what hurts the most? Not failure, but realizing you have lived for too long without truly moving forward. Many people fear that moment, which is why they avoid self-reflection at all costs. They fill their time with content, with social media, with unnecessary work, with endless entertainment. Because silence is dangerous. In silence, you begin to see your life more clearly. And the truth is this: many people are not as afraid of failure as they are of facing the gap between who they are right now and who they know they could become. That gap creates discomfort. But you need to understand something. Discomfort is not a sign you are heading in the wrong direction. Sometimes, it is a sign that you are finally becoming honest with yourself. There are difficult questions everyone must face someday. How have I been using my time? Am I living up to my potential? Or am I just existing? If my life continues exactly like this, will I truly be satisfied? Those are not comfortable questions, but they are necessary, because growth always begins with awareness. You cannot change what you refuse to see. And this is important. Self-reflection is not about hating yourself, not about drowning in guilt, not about telling yourself you are a failure. It is about seeing things more clearly. A person does not mature because they are perfect. They mature because they are honest enough to recognize where they need to change. That is real strength. Many people spend their entire lives protecting their ego. They always need to feel right, always need reasons to justify why their life makes sense the way it is. But growth does not begin when the ego is protected. It begins when the ego becomes quiet and the truth is finally allowed to enter. I want you to try something. Look back seriously at the last 12 months of your life. Not what you planned to do, not what you said you would do, but what you actually repeated every single day. Which habits are building your future? Which habits are destroying it? Are you spending more time consuming or creating? Are you moving closer to the life you want, or just becoming better at procrastinating? Those are the kinds of questions that change people. Because sometimes the thing keeping you stuck is not lack of opportunity. It is the fact that you have never truly stopped to evaluate yourself honestly enough. Today, this is harder than ever. The modern world constantly distracts people. The moment you feel even slightly uncomfortable, You can open your phone and instantly escape the feeling. You can scroll for hours without thinking about your life. You can endlessly consume dopamine to avoid facing the truth that you are standing still. But remember this: long-term distraction never heals inner emptiness. It only delays the conversation you will eventually have to face with yourself. And the irony is, the most uncomfortable moments are often the most important ones, because the place that makes you the most uncomfortable is often where growth is waiting for you. A mature person is not someone without flaws. It is someone who no longer runs away from seeing them. That is when life begins to change direction. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a very quiet moment when you finally accept that your current self can no longer continue controlling your future. And then something new begins to happen. You no longer just want to change. You begin to feel that change is necessary. And that is exactly where the line between preference and requirement begins to appear. Principle 4. Preferences never change lives. Most people like the idea of a better life. They want to be healthier, more disciplined, more successful, wealthier, a better version of themselves. The problem is, wanting is rarely strong enough to change a life, because preference is a very weak force. It works well when you feel inspired, when your energy is high, when the goal still feels exciting, when everything still feels new. But real life does not operate inside those perfect moments. Life operates on the days you are tired, the days you lose motivation, the days you want to quit, the days nobody sees your effort. That is where the real difference appears. I want you to notice this. A lot of people start extremely strong. At the beginning of the year, they make new plans, buy new books, set new goals. Sometimes they even feel like a completely new person. Then a few weeks later, everything goes back to the way it was before. Not because they are bad people, not because they lack potential, but because most of what they call commitment is really just preference with a little emotional intensity attached to it. And preference always negotiates when discomfort appears. Someone says, I want to go to the gym, but when the weather gets cold, they stay home. Someone says, I want personal growth, but when the phone vibrates, they scroll for 2 more hours. Someone says, I want to build my future, but every night they spend all their energy on things that lead nowhere. That is what you need to understand. Preference loves the result. Requirement accepts the price. And life only changes when growth shifts from something you like into something you no longer allow yourself to live without. There is a sentence I want you to remember for a long time. Preference whispers. Requirement commands. Preference says, if it's convenient, do it. Requirement says, no matter what, it must be done. That is the difference. A person who sees discipline as a preference will act when they feel like it. A person who sees discipline as a requirement will act even without inspiration. And the irony is, the second person usually goes much farther in life, even if they are not the most talented, because success rarely belongs to the most motivated person. It usually belongs to the person who stops negotiating with what matters. I have seen many extremely intelligent people who never truly grow. They read a lot, understand a lot, have huge potential, yet their lives remain unchanged. Why? Because growth is still only a good idea to them. It has never become a required standard. They like the idea of self-discipline, but they never demanded it from themselves. They like the idea of consistency, but they never treated it as non-negotiable. And that is why so many people live in cycles of starting and quitting. They depend on emotion to create consistency. But emotions always change. Some days you feel powerful. Some days you feel weak. Some days you want to conquer the world. Some days you just want to lie down and avoid everything. If your actions depend entirely on your emotions, your life will always lack stability. That is why truly mature people do not live based on motivation. They live based on standards. They do not ask, do I feel like doing this today? They ask, what would the person I want to become do in this situation? That is a completely different mindset. And when that mindset appears, everything begins to change. You stop negotiating every morning about whether you should do what needs to be done. The decision has already been made beforehand. You train because it is a requirement. You work seriously because it is a requirement. You keep promises to yourself because it is a requirement. Not because you always enjoy it, but because you understand your life can no longer continue being built on temporary emotions. This is where self-respect begins to form. Because every time you break a promise to yourself, a piece of inner trust erodes. You say you will start, then you don't. You say you will change, then you procrastinate. You say you will become serious, then return to old habits again. Slowly, you stop believing your own words. That is a massive price many people never realize they are paying. When someone loses self-trust, they begin entering every new goal with a quiet doubt inside themselves. Maybe I'll quit again anyway. But every time you do what needs to be done, even when you don't want to, self-trust is rebuilt little by little. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, your identity changes. You begin becoming the kind of person you can rely on. That is one of the most powerful feelings in life. And then one very special day arrives. A day when you wake up and realize growth is no longer something that would simply be nice to have. It becomes mandatory. You no longer want to return to your old self. No longer want to live half serious and half procrastinating. No longer want to waste more years inside familiar cycles. That is when life truly begins changing direction. And if today's message is making you reflect on yourself, subscribe right now, because growth does not happen overnight. It happens through the small choices you repeat every single day. And when growth is no longer a preference, the next thing that changes will be the standards you accept from yourself. That is where real transformation begins. Principle 5. Raise your standards. Every person is living inside an invisible set of standards they created for themselves. Those standards determine how seriously you work, how you respond to failure, how long you allow yourself to procrastinate, what you tolerate from yourself, and ultimately how far your life will go. What's interesting is that most people have never truly sat down and asked themselves, what are my current standards? Not what they say, not what they post online, not what they want to believe about themselves, but the real standards reflected through their daily actions. Because life always reveals your true standards through your results. If you constantly procrastinate, that is a standard. If you regularly quit halfway, that is a standard. If you always do things at the good enough level, that is a standard. A lot of people think they have high standards simply because they have big dreams. But dreams do not reveal standards. Habits reveal standards. I once knew a man who always talked about wanting to build an extraordinary life. He constantly talked about success, self-discipline, financial freedom, but every night he stayed up until 2 a.m. scrolling on his phone. Every morning he woke up late, exhausted, and entered the day half awake. That does not mean he was a bad person. It simply means his real standards were lower than he wanted to admit. And that is where many people get stuck. They want a level 10 life with level 3 standards. But life does not work that way. You do not get the life you want. You get the life your standards allow. If your standards allow distraction, distraction will dominate your life. If your standards allow inconsistency, inconsistency will become your identity. If your standards allow excuses, excuses will always find room to survive. That is why real growth always comes with a very uncomfortable decision. Stop accepting the things that once felt normal. One of the most dangerous things about life is that human beings can adapt to almost anything. You can adapt to procrastinating every day, adapt to breaking promises to yourself, adapt to living beneath your true potential. And after a while, the things that once bothered you start becoming normal. That is how standards slowly decline without anyone noticing. Not in one day, but through hundreds of moments where you say, it's okay to skip it today. The danger of tolerance is that it is very quiet. When you procrastinate once, nothing major happens. When you skip one workout, nothing collapses. When you waste a few hours on social media, life still goes on. But the problem is, those small things do not exist separately. They compound, and one day you look back and realize your entire life was built from the small things you allowed to exist for too long. That is why raising your standards does not begin with motivation. It begins with intolerance. You stop accepting certain behaviors. You stop accepting talking more than acting, constant procrastination, living without intention, using distraction to escape reality. That is a massive shift. Because until the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing, people rarely change for real. I want you to think about this. Some people spend years trying to increase motivation, but what they truly need is not more motivation. They need a new standard, because motivation changes with emotion. Standards change behavior. A person with high standards does not always need to feel excited. They simply no longer allow themselves to fall back to their old level. That is why successful people often look so stable. Not because they always feel strong, but because they have decided what the minimum standard they accept from themselves will be. And when standards change, life starts changing direction very quickly. You begin paying more attention to how you use your time. You begin feeling uncomfortable wasting entire days meaninglessly. You become irritated by your own excuses. You begin feeling like your old self no longer fits who you are becoming. That is a sign growth is happening. Many people think raising your standards means becoming perfect. No, it means When you fall short, you return to the standard instead of lowering the standard to match your laziness. That is a huge difference. A person who has not truly changed will fail once, then lower their expectations. A person who is maturing will fail, face it directly, then immediately return to the standard. No drama, no self-hate, just responsibility. And responsibility is always where personal power begins. Do you know what happens when someone consistently maintains their standards? They begin trusting themselves. That is something extremely rare today. Many people do not lack talent, they lack self-trust. They no longer believe they will follow through, no longer believe they will stay consistent, no longer believe they can truly change, because they have broken promises to themselves too many times. But every time you maintain your standards on a difficult day, you rebuild that trust, little by little. And eventually discipline stops being something you try to do. It starts becoming your identity. You are no longer someone trying to change. You begin becoming the kind of person who no longer accepts a mediocre life from themselves. And that is when the real battle appears. Not the battle with the world, but the battle with the voice inside you that constantly wants to negotiate its way back into old comfort. That is what we are going to talk about next. Principle 6. Stop negotiating with yourself. There is a battle that almost everyone participates in every day, but very few people realize it is destroying their life. It is not a battle with other people, not with the economy, not with circumstances. It is the constant negotiation with yourself. You know that feeling? The alarm goes off and a voice appears. I'm too tired today. A little more sleep is fine. You plan to focus on work, then suddenly think, I'll check my phone for just 10 minutes. You tell yourself you will finally get serious starting today, then by evening you convince yourself again. Tomorrow isn't too late to start. At first glance, those negotiations seem tiny. But understand this, a person's life is often shaped by private conversations nobody else can hear. Every time you negotiate your way into choosing comfort, you are quietly building a weaker identity. And the dangerous part is that it happens too slowly for you to notice. Nobody destroys their life in a single day. It happens through thousands of small moments where they repeatedly choose comfort over growth. That is why real self-discipline is not about forcing yourself to suffer. It is the ability to end the negotiation before it begins. I once realized something very interesting. The people who go very far in life are not necessarily more motivated than everyone else. They simply waste less energy debating with themselves. Once they decide to do something, they do it. Once they set a standard, they keep it. Once they commit, they stop renegotiating every single day. Meanwhile, many other people burn almost all their mental energy simply deciding whether they should do the things they already know they need to do. That is an exhaustion many people do not understand the source of. They think they lack energy. But sometimes the problem is not lack of energy. It is that they are living with too many undecided questions. Every morning they must decide again. Am I serious today? Am I training today? Am I going to focus today? Am I going to procrastinate today? That kind of life is exhausting because you are not only working, you are also constantly arguing with the weaker version of yourself. And if you are not careful, that version will win enough times to become who you really are. Today, this negotiation is worse than ever because the modern world is designed to make distraction easy. Every app wants your attention. Every notification pulls you away from focus. Every platform rewards instant dopamine for avoiding difficult things. That is why many modern people lose the ability to do deep work. They are no longer used to discomfort. The moment something feels slightly difficult, they immediately look for something easier. A short video, a text message, a quick scroll, a promise to do it later, and suddenly the entire day disappears. I want you to remember this. Every time you say, I'll do it tomorrow, you are not just delaying action, you are teaching yourself that your own words cannot be trusted. That is the biggest price of all. Because when someone loses trust in themselves, every future goal becomes weaker from the very beginning. They start every new plan with a quiet doubt inside. I'll probably quit again anyway. That is why so many people constantly try to reset their life every Monday, new month, new year. But the old mindset is still there, and the negotiation continues. One day, I realized something. Real freedom does not come from being able to do whatever you want. Real freedom comes when you are no longer controlled by tiny impulses. When you can say, I'm going to do this, and then actually do it, without needing the perfect mood, without needing overwhelming inspiration, without needing anyone to watch you. That is real power. Do you know what is interesting? The strongest people are usually not dramatic about discipline. They do not constantly talk about motivation, do not constantly announce that they are changing their life. They simply quietly keep promises to themselves day after day after day. And that kind of consistency is almost impossible to beat over time, because success rarely comes from giant moments. It comes from ordinary days, small decisions, the times you still do what needs to be done even when nobody sees it, the moments you win the negotiation inside your own mind. That is where futures are built. I think there is a very true statement. The hardest life is not the life of the person who failed. It is the life of the person who always knows what they should do but never does it, because deep down they constantly feel that gap. The gap between who they are now and who they could become. That gap creates frustration, creates anxiety, creates the feeling that they are wasting their life. And the irony is many people try to heal that feeling with even more distraction, when what they truly need is a decision that they will no longer negotiate with what matters. No more negotiating with health, no more negotiating with growth, no more negotiating with their future. Because eventually, you must choose. Either endure the discomfort of discipline or endure the pain of regret. And one of those pains is guaranteed to arrive. That is where life begins splitting into two very different directions. Principle 7, the pain of growth or the pain of regret. Life always demands a price. Nobody escapes that. The question is not, will you experience pain or not? The question is, which type of pain will you choose? Because there are two types of pain that shape almost an entire human life. One is the pain of growth. The other is the pain of regret. And the irony is many people spend their whole life avoiding the first pain, only to end up living with the second one, which is far heavier. The pain of growth usually comes early. It is waking up while still tired, working before seeing results, rejecting instant comfort, maintaining discipline when nobody is watching, continuing to try when everything still feels slow. Nobody enjoys that type of pain. It is uncomfortable. It is boring. It demands patience. And today's world especially hates patience. Everything is instant. Instant dopamine, instant entertainment, instant validation. People are becoming used to feeling good immediately. That is why so many people struggle with doing things whose payoff comes slowly. But almost everything valuable in life comes slowly. Self-discipline comes slowly. Financial freedom comes slowly. Strong character comes slowly. Meaningful success comes slowly. Growth always requires discomfort before reward. And that is where most people quit. Not because they lack ability, but because they cannot tolerate the period where effort has not yet produced visible results. I have seen many people begin a new journey with massive excitement. The first week, they are focused, highly motivated, full of hope. Then a few weeks later, reality appears. The results are not obvious yet. Progress is still slow. Everything starts feeling repetitive. And that is when they begin hearing a very familiar voice. Maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe later. Maybe I'm not good enough. No. Many times, the problem is not that you are not good enough. You simply have not been patient enough to move through the discomfort of growth. Because growth rarely feels exciting while it is happening. Most of the time, it simply feels like repeating the right thing, quietly, for long enough. That is why discipline is so difficult. Not because the action itself is too hard, but because repetition does not create dopamine as strongly as distraction does. 1 hour of deep work is not as stimulating as 1 hour of scrolling. A workout is not as comfortable as resting in bed. An honest conversation with yourself is not as comfortable as escaping into entertainment. That is the battle of modern life. Comfort is becoming too accessible. And when comfort becomes too easy, people slowly become weaker without noticing it. But this is what I want you to deeply understand. The pain of growth is usually temporary. The pain of regret is not. Regret has a way of staying with people for a very long time. It appears in very quiet moments. When you see someone else living the life you once wanted, when you remember opportunities you were too afraid to take, when you realize you had more time than you thought but used it the wrong way, that is a very different type of pain. It is not dramatic. It is silent, but it is heavy. I have met people who were completely exhausted even though their work was not physically demanding. Later I understood. They were not tired because they were doing too much. They were tired because they had spent too long living in a state of knowing they needed to change but never changing. That is a very dangerous emotional exhaustion. Because deep down, human beings always know when they are living beneath their true potential. You may hide that from other people, but it is very difficult to hide it from yourself. And the longer you delay, the more regret accumulates. Like compound interest, one day of procrastination feels small. One wasted week feels harmless. 1 year of living half committed feels like there's still time. Then one day you look back and realize you traded years of your life for temporary comfort. That is why I have always believed discipline hurts for a few months. Regret hurts for a lifetime. Many people think growth will make life harder. No, growth usually makes life more meaningful. Yes, it requires effort. Yes, it makes you uncomfortable. But discomfort with meaning is always easier to live with than emptiness. Many modern people are not truly suffering because they lack comfort. They suffer because they lack meaning. They wake up without feeling like they are moving forward, without feeling like they are building something they can be proud of, without feeling like they are becoming the person they want to become. That is why anxiety and emptiness are becoming more common. Human beings were born to grow. When growth stops for too long, something inside begins to collapse. You begin losing energy, losing excitement, losing sharpness, losing faith in yourself, not because you are incapable, but because your soul knows it was made for more than this. And eventually there comes a very important moment in life, the moment you finally understand that there is no completely painless path. Inaction has its own pain. Not changing has its own consequences. Standing still is also taking your life away day by day. When you truly understand that, discipline begins looking different. It no longer feels like punishment. It becomes self-respect. You train not because you enjoy pain. You work seriously not because you enjoy suffering. You keep commitments not because you want to prove something to the world. You do those things because you no longer want to live with regret. That is a massive shift. Because when someone finally becomes tired enough of the pain of regret, they become willing to endure the pain of growth. And that is where real transformation begins. Not during moments of hype, but during the quiet moment when you decide, I would rather struggle to grow than continue suffering from standing still. And from that moment forward, you stop living like a passenger. You begin becoming the architect of your own future. Principle 8, become the architect of your future. There is a massive difference between two types of people in this world. One type lives by reaction. The other lives by design. The first person wakes up and lets the day decide who they will become. Mood determines action. Circumstances determine effort. Distraction determines attention. Other people determine emotions. They are like passengers on a ship without even knowing where it is going. And the sad part is many people live their entire lives that way without realizing it. They are always busy, always have things to do, always reacting to whatever is happening around them. But they rarely stop long enough to ask themselves, am I intentionally building my life or just drifting through it? That is a very important question, because life does not automatically create a better future for you. It only amplifies the direction you are moving in every day. If every day you become more distracted, more inconsistent, less intentional, then your future will reflect exactly that. But if every day you become slightly more disciplined, slightly more focused, slightly more intentional, then life starts changing direction. Not dramatically, not through overnight success, but little by little, like an architect building a skyscraper. Nobody sees the entire building appear in one day, but every small brick is shaping the final structure. Your future works the same way. It is built from ordinary mornings, small habits, choices nobody notices, days when you continue even without applause. That is what most people misunderstand about success. They look at the final result without seeing the thousands of ordinary days that created it. I have met people who constantly say, I want my life to change, but their daily systems are creating the exact same old life. They want confidence but live without discipline. They want financial freedom but spend money without intention. They want peace but give their attention to chaos all day long. You cannot build a strong future using weak habits. That is like trying to build a massive building on a cracked foundation. Sooner or later, it collapses. That is why real growth always begins with identity. Not, what do you want, but who are you becoming through the repeated actions of your daily life? Because in the end, your life reflects your dominant identity. If every day you live like someone who is easily distracted, you will become someone who is easily distracted. If every day you live like someone disciplined, discipline slowly becomes your nature. That is the power of repetition. Many people wait for a huge moment to change their life, but almost every meaningful transformation is built through tiny moments nobody celebrates. 1 hour of deep work, one morning without procrastination, one time keeping a promise to yourself, one small decision repeated long enough, That is how futures are created. And today, this matters more than ever. Because the world is changing incredibly fast. AI is replacing average effort. Distraction is becoming society's default setting. Many people are consuming far more than they create. In a world like this, people capable of intentional living will become increasingly rare. And what is rare usually becomes valuable. That is why self-discipline is no longer just a good habit. It is becoming a survival advantage. A person who can focus deeply, keep commitments, build consistent habits, control attention will have an enormous advantage in the future, not because they are perfect, but because they do not allow their life to be controlled by every emotion and every distraction that appears throughout the day. I think this is something many people need to hear. You do not need to change your entire life overnight. You only need to start living like an architect instead of a passenger. Architects have intention. They do not build randomly. They know what they are creating, and every decision serves that direction. You need to live that way too. When you wake up, ask yourself, what will I build for my future today? Not, am I in the mood today? That is the difference. A person who lives based on mood will always be inconsistent. A person who lives based on mission slowly becomes unstoppable. And what is interesting is this: when you live intentionally enough for long enough, your self-respect begins rising dramatically. Because deep down, you know you are no longer wasting your life. You are no longer merely existing. You are actively creating your future self. That is an incredibly powerful feeling. It changes your mornings. It changes discipline. It makes hard work feel more meaningful. Because effort becomes easier when it is connected to identity. You are no longer trying to focus. You become a focused person. No longer trying to live with discipline. You become a person with high standards. No longer trying to change your life. You become someone who builds their life every single day. That is a massive shift. And eventually there comes a special moment. The moment you look back at your old self and realize you no longer belong to that person anymore. You no longer fit your old excuses. No longer fit your old comfort zone. No longer fit a half-committed life. That is when an identity begins to die so a stronger version can be born. And that is exactly where the deepest transformation begins. Principle 9, the day the old you dies. There are moments in life that are not loud yet change everything. No epic soundtrack, no standing ovation, no miracle happening. Just a very quiet moment when you finally become tired of being your old self. I think almost everyone carries a silent battle inside. One part of them knows they could become more, knows they were made for more than this stagnation, knows they are wasting time, energy, and potential. But the other part still clings to old comfort, clings to old habits, clings to old excuses, clings to old identity. And that battle can last for years. That is why many people feel exhausted even when their life does not look terrible from the outside, because deep down they are living between two versions of themselves. The version they are now and the version they know they could become. That gap creates suffering. You can feel it during very late nights, when the noise disappears, when distractions stop, when you sit alone with your thoughts. That is when the truth begins to appear. That maybe the thing keeping you trapped is not lack of opportunity, not lack of talent, not lack of time, but the fact that you are still trying to keep your old self alive. And this is something very important you must understand. You cannot build a new life with an old identity. That is why many people change habits for a while, then eventually return to their old patterns. Because behavior can temporarily change, but identity always pulls you back toward what feels familiar. If deep down you still see yourself as someone who procrastinates, someone who lacks consistency, someone who is not really disciplined, someone who always starts and quits halfway, then sooner or later, your actions will return to matching that identity. That is why real transformation does not begin with changing habits. It begins with identity death. The old version must die, not physically, but psychologically. The old person who constantly negotiates, constantly procrastinates, constantly lives half-committed, constantly waits for motivation, constantly needs comfort, cannot be the person who builds a new future. One of the most powerful moments of my life was when I understood this. Growth was no longer something I would do if possible. It became necessary. I no longer wanted to return to my old life. No longer wanted to wake up every day feeling like I was wasting my potential. No longer wanted to watch time pass without truly living. No longer wanted to make peace with mediocrity. That is the moment everything changes. Not because you suddenly become perfect, But because you finally stop identifying with the weaker version of yourself, you begin seeing excuses differently. The things that once sounded reasonable now sound like self-betrayal. You begin seeing distraction differently. The things that once helped you relax now feel like the very things stealing your life away. You begin seeing time differently because you understand that every day spent repeating the old version of yourself strengthens the old identity even more. And then one day, you simply decide, enough. That is a very powerful word. Not dramatic, not a motivational speech. Just enough. Enough breaking promises to yourself. Enough living beneath your true potential. Enough delaying your life for another year. That is the day the old identity begins losing control. Do you know what is interesting? Many people think transformation will feel exciting, but sometimes it feels more like grief, because you are letting go of a version of yourself that has lived with you for a very long time. The version that loves comfort, fears failure, is addicted to distraction, avoids discomfort, constantly searches for the easier path. That version once protected you from short-term pain, but it also kept you away from growth for a very long time. And to step into a new life, you must be willing to let that version go. That is why real growth is always uncomfortable at the identity level. Not just because you are doing harder work, but because you are no longer the same person anymore. You begin to speak differently, think differently, use time differently, respond to discomfort differently, view the future differently, and the irony is other people usually notice it before you do. They will say, "You've changed lately." Exactly. Because real growth always changes a person's energy. The person who once lived reactively begins living intentionally. The person who once needed motivation begins living through standards. The person who was constantly distracted begins protecting focus like they are protecting their future. That is an identity shift. And identity shifts are what create lasting change. Not hype, not temporary discipline, not a few weeks of effort, but a new person with a new standard. I believe almost every meaningful life has a day like this. The day someone finally understands that if they do not change now, they will lose too much in the future. That is the day comfort loses its appeal. The day excuses lose their power. The day procrastination starts feeling more painful than action. That is the day the old you dies. And when that happens, something powerful begins to appear. Real commitment. No more "I'll try and see." No more "hopefully this time is different." No more "I'll do it if I feel inspired." Only decision. A real decision always changes the direction of a life. Because from that moment forward, you no longer live to protect your old self. You begin living to build the person you were born to become. And when a decision like that is truly made, it always closes old doors behind you. Principle 10. A real decision always closes old doors. Most of what people call decisions are actually temporary emotions spoken with a stronger tone of voice. They say, "Starting tomorrow, I'll change. I'll become more serious. I'll live more disciplined. I won't go back to my old self anymore." But the moment a few difficult days appear, everything returns to the way it was before. Not because they are weak, but because they never truly made a complete decision. You need to understand this. A real decision always closes something behind it. It closes old choices, closes old paths, closes the old version of yourself. That is why real decisions are rare. Because people love keeping an escape route. They want change while still keeping old comfort within reach. They want discipline while still wanting permission to procrastinate when they are not in the mood. They want growth while still wanting life to stay easy. And when the old door remains open, people will almost always return to it once pressure appears. I realized that the biggest changes in my life never came from motivation. They came from moments when I finally decided, I am not going back anymore. No more returning to the old lifestyle. No more returning to old excuses. No more returning to the version that always needs comfort to feel okay. That is the difference between interest and commitment. Interest says, I'll try. Commitment says, I no longer have any choice except becoming the person I need to become. A truly committed person does not wake up every morning asking, do I feel like doing this today? That question died the day the decision was made. They simply wake up and continue building. That is what makes truly disciplined people look so calm. They no longer waste energy arguing with themselves. They no longer wake up every day to renegotiate their future. The decision has already been made. And when someone stops renegotiating with themselves, their energy becomes incredibly powerful, because divided energy is always weak. Half wants growth, half wants comfort, Half wants a better future. Half is still addicted to present ease. That kind of life exhausts people. But when a real decision is finally made, energy begins unifying. You no longer want change while simultaneously wanting to stay the same. You accept the price of growth. And that is where real momentum begins appearing. I think many people underestimate the power of a real decision. They think transformation comes from more knowledge, stronger motivation, better strategy. No, many people already know everything they need to do. They just have not truly decided to live differently yet, because a real decision always creates responsibility. When you truly decide to live more disciplined, focus more, become more serious about your life, you no longer get to pretend you didn't know. Awareness creates responsibility, and that is why many people prefer living half-committed. It feels safer. If they fail, they can say, "I never really tried." But when you become truly committed, excuses begin disappearing. At that point, life becomes very clear. Either you keep the standard, or you do not. Either you build your future, or you delay it. There is no gray area anymore. That is why real decisions usually feel very quiet. No huge announcements needed. No need to prove anything to the world. Just a deeply private moment when you say to yourself, "I have lived this way long enough." And from that moment forward, something begins changing. You begin viewing time differently. The things that once wasted hours of your life begin losing their appeal. Meaningless conversations begin draining you. Distractions that once felt harmless begin feeling expensive. Because you finally understand that every day is building some kind of future. There are no unimportant days. Every day is either reinforcing the old version of yourself or building the new one. That is why consistency is so powerful. Not because one disciplined day will change your life, but because identity is built from repetition. A person who keeps commitments on difficult days is completely different from someone who only acts when inspired. And over time, that gap becomes enormous. I want you to remember this for a long time. Life does not change during the moments you feel the most inspired. It changes during the moment you finally decide, "No matter how I feel, I will continue." That is maturity. No longer living based on emotion. No longer living based on temporary excitement, but living through standards and direction. In the end, what creates an extraordinary life is not a few explosive moments. It is an ordinary person keeping their commitment long enough, someone who continues, when nobody is watching, when there are no results yet, when life is not easy, when motivation is no longer strong. That is the person who eventually changes their destiny. And maybe the most beautiful thing about growth is this: you do not need to become perfect overnight. You only need to decide that you will no longer fall asleep inside your old self again. Because the day you truly decide to mature is not the day life suddenly becomes easier. It is the day you finally begin living intentionally. The day you stop waiting for a better life to magically appear. The day you understand your future is being built from the tiny actions of today. And from that day forward, everything begins changing. Not quickly, not loudly, but very real. Day by day, you begin becoming the person you once only hoped you could become. And that is the most valuable thing about growth. Not how many things you achieve, but that you finally become the person deep inside you always knew you could become. There is one thing I want you to remember after everything we talked about today. A person's life rarely changes simply because they heard a motivational speech. It changes when they begin seeing themselves differently. When they stop viewing procrastination as normal, stop viewing distraction as harmless, stop viewing living beneath their true potential as something acceptable for a few more years. That is where real growth begins. Not in the most exciting moments, but in the moment you finally become honest with yourself, that you no longer want to live like your old self. I think most people wait for a perfect time to change. Someday when they have more motivation, more time, less pressure, more confidence, more readiness. But the truth is this: life rarely gives transformation to people who only wait for inspiration. It gives it to people who decide to act even before they feel perfect. Because almost everything meaningful in life is built during very ordinary days. The days when you still do what needs to be done without being in the mood. You still keep promises to yourself. You still continue even when progress is slow. You still choose growth instead of comfort. That is where identity is created. And over time, identity creates destiny. You do not become a strong person in one giant moment. You become strong through hundreds of tiny decisions nobody sees. Every time you get up instead of procrastinating, you focus instead of becoming distracted, You maintain standards instead of lowering them. You continue instead of quitting. You are placing another brick into your future. That is why I have always believed self-discipline is one of the greatest acts of self-respect a person can give themselves. Because when you are disciplined, you are telling yourself, my future matters. My potential deserves protection. This life deserves to be lived more seriously. And maybe today will not be the day everything completely changes. But it can be the day you finally make the right decision. The decision to stop sleeping through your life, stop living half-committed, stop wasting time on the things stealing your future. Because deep down, I think you have known what needs to change for a very long time. You were only waiting for a moment to truly commit to it. And maybe that moment is today. So if this video resonated with you, hit like and subscribe to continue this journey with me. And before you leave, I want to ask you one question. Today, what is the very first thing you are deciding to change? Write it down in the comments. Not to impress anyone else, but to mark the moment you finally stop negotiating with your own future. You and I both have a gift today. Use it wisely, and I will see you in the next video.